Welcome to the In Search of More podcast. I am your host, Eli Nash. Join me weekly on my quest for more from myself and more from this world. We'll see you on the other side. Okay, so if you've watched the other episode with Yoni Waysman, then this is the portion of the podcast, or the portion of the conversation, separated into a second podcast where we talk about most of his questions directed towards me. We get into conversation / questions. You'll see it as you get into it. If you have not watched that episode, this one stands alone on its own as well. Yoni is someone who's come to Adam a couple of times. I've known him when we were teenagers, and he was invited by me to interview me on this podcast. So he prepared some questions. He has a number of questions for me, and we'll go through those on this podcast. If you enjoy it, and I think you'll like the first part as well, so check that one out as well. And we'll see you on the other side. Okay, we're back.
All right. So thank you for that. That was because I'm very curious about this process, because I can just imagine how hard it is as you see a lot of information, a lot of truth, and then to be able to transmit it. It's a process, and thank you for sharing that part of the process. I want to kind of take a slight detour in this direction and ask you a pretty personal question. As a child, when you had a lot of feelings or ideas or emotions, was there space for your parents or for those around you where you can have that experience, where you can kind of like express what you had to say without getting an immediate like shutdown? Or it was like there was a strong need for conformity?
Okay, so you had me until you said, or there was a strong need for conformity.
Meaning,
that's all. Answer the question. So the answer is no. I didn't feel like I had that space, but I also did not feel a strong need for conformity. So I think that my dad did a very good job with us of giving us permission to be, like, to march to the beat of our own drum. And I'm not even sure how he did, if it was conscious or not, but
right.
I definitely felt that from him, that there was a level of comfort that I did not have to toe the line exactly. Like I could, certainly in terms of thinking, I can think. Like I'm allowed permission to, I have permission to think.
Right.
It definitely felt that way. At the same point in time, was there space to hear me out? I still don't feel that there is. That's why I have a podcast. Right. So I can say, I don't have to feel like an idiot talking to myself. And then whoever wants to listen.
Right. I'm just curious, because there's this like, you have this strong drive to, and a lot of information to share, which kind of makes sense that you grew up with that. But then it's a practice now to be able to cushion it, to be able to hold the intensity, and to do it in a kind way. And so what I'm asking you in a more direct way was, did you grow up, is gentleness something that is challenging for you? Did you grow up in a gentle environment?
Did I grow up in a gentle environment? Ask the question differently.
If you had pain, or if you had frustration, or if you needed support, or if you were wrestling with something, was there space for you to freak out, so to say, and like still be held?
No. So no, there was a lot of space and understanding for if physically there was something going on. If physically I was going through something, then there was a lot of space for that. But I don't think there was a recognition when I grew up of the depth of the human emotional experience and world. There's certainly the depth of my human and emotional world. And no, I didn't feel the space for that.
the way it looked for a while was me being very withdrawn, very quiet, not talking too much. Like I lived very much in my own world. And then over time, I've become much more comfortable expressing. And then as I get more comfortable expressing, which actually ironically is still a process. It's not in all settings and in all situations, whereas I'm as comfortable expressing as in others. But as I do that, then oftentimes we can go too far with something. So then I start learning how to calibrate that and say, here I pushed too far, here I shared too much, here I spoke too long, whatever it is, right? In whatever way I misread the situation, now calibrate from there.
So if you needed to express something in your household, like did you have to put a lot of energy behind it to be heard?
If I wanted to be, yeah. I felt like there was one space, there was one avenue that I had. So I enjoyed writing as a kid, whatever that meant. There could be an assignment for school and working on that. And my dad enjoyed that as well. He enjoyed writing too, and he enjoyed, I think it bothered him that he didn't live in a place where that was common. People can write. And he enjoyed that I took interest in this at a young age, and he took a lot of interest in what I wrote and how I wrote it. So in that space, there was a lot of, I felt like there was attention and room for those ideas to be expressed. So I'm writing this essay for school, and at a very young age, it was very important to me to learn English. I taught myself English at a young age through this computer game, Police Quest. And in yeshiva, there was I was in Lubavitcher yeshiva. It was, if you want to go to English, okay, you had the option, and depending on where it was, there was one in Crown Heights and one in Flatbush. There was an hour or 3 hours a day of instruction. But I was very thirsty for that. In general, I was a student. It was something I enjoyed. I enjoyed learning. I still do. And English subjects, secular subjects were very important to me, especially writing English. I wanted to know how to do this. And my father took a lot of interest in that. So in that space, I knew I can write a 3 or 4 page essay, and he would read it, take it in, discuss it with me. That was definitely an area where it felt nurtured.
So there was like a moving pieces. There was some form of like very, very sharp expression. And was your father a very brilliant man, like a bright man?
I'd say, yeah.
So, and then on the other side of it, there isn't the cushion to be able to then express the human element of your experience. So there's like, maybe it's not the best description. There is like a brain-heart disconnect.
Well, this wasn't about my own experience, right? That wasn't what I was writing. It was just my own thoughts or ideas, anything else. And in that space, he took interest. But one thing I have shared a number of times on this podcast and in other settings as well is that my sexual addiction was very connected to verbal expression. And where I felt my verbal expression was frustrated, then that, the only other place I knew to release that was sexually. And as I found this open up more, the intensity of that, drive lessened.
So do you feel that you're still healing your sexual challenges through being better at expressing yourself, being able to really focus your vocal expression precisely to spaces that are extremely hard to reach? Like as you go through this process with the Dhamma and you're able to get your message across and heighten your intuition, and is your healing expanding even more?
Yeah. So, there's a podcast I did early on, which I feel like is a manifesto of this work, and maybe my personal one, which is I am patient zero, I think is what I called it, or heal yourself. there were two that I did around the same time. I Am Patient Zero and Heal Yourself. And really what this is it's my own healing journey. I'm not really thinking that
Right.
I'm healing someone else in that way. I'm on my own path. And if there's anything I can help someone with, is for them to know that they're on their own path and that everything exists for us to heal ourselves. But to step into that role, not dumb, I'll play that role because someone has to, right? In order for the container to exist, in order for us to be able to sit in a circle, there has to be one
Right.
who has assigned himself to, I am going to set the rules of this. Like a table has to have someone sitting at the head, someone who's assigns himself to dictate that pace. But as soon as Mayor does a breath work, I'm lying down on my own breathwork session. I'm not here to tell anyone anything. I'm lying down. Mayor's the facilitator, and I'm here as a participant in a breathwork session. So this is not about anyone else's journey. It's very much my own. And the reason why I continue to engage with Adama and with all these things is because I find it enliven and enriches my own healing growth journey. And also healing is a poor word.
Right.
I don't know who it was. It was Dan Brule who said, healing is growth and growth is healing. They're synonymous.
Right.
I think he quoted someone else when he said it on the podcast I did with him. And it's 100% true. It's this idea of we are sick and we need healing. That's a very sick idea.
Right.
It's where organisms meant to grow.
Right.
And grow in knowledge and grow in experience and become something more than we came in with. And that's that's an ongoing process. Dov Ber-Pinson has a book on Tshuva. He writes, transformation takes a lifetime. That is why we have a lifetime. We're on this path. We're on the path to grow and to become more. And all of the things that I'm doing are meant to nurture and help me grow. And if in the process others benefit from it, of course, that's a beautiful thing, but it's not the...
Right.
I don't think I'm assigned to, right? Meaning like the souls connect. I don't think I'm connecting with people who need me. I'm connecting with people who I need.
That's beautiful. Something came to when you were speaking about the relationship between your sexual healing and your verbal expression, your verbal capacity, where it just feels that being able to express well verbally is being able to channel your energy.
Yes.
And when we can't do that, then it just spills.
Yes.
I dated a girl, and it was very important for us to have just to connect. And as we started to connect, she just immediately wanted to get to touch, and I'm like, please, let's build the foundation of vulnerability, and then as the foundation for our intimacy, and then that'll also be a foundation for potential lust, as opposed to doing the other
potential
lust.
Okay, interesting choice of words.
I mean, I'll be honest about it. I'm still an animal. I mean, instead of automatically having the verbal breakdown and immediately jumping and it's and I feel like it's been a big part of my life where it's I didn't have any connection ability.
It's like an intimacy bypass.
Right. You and your bypasses.
But it's true.
Yeah, it's totally true.
It's true.
Right? So I find that interesting. I didn't hear that podcast, but that's it just hit me.
Which one? The I Am Patient Zero?
Yeah.
Yeah. It was ones I used to do where I discussed an idea and I would sit with this gentleman, Ryan Carter, and kind of bounce these ideas off of him. But it was more of a podcast where I spoke, maybe in some ways similar to this one, where I spoke and shared an idea and, had an opportunity to work it through with Ryan. So
this is another curious question I have, and I think it connects on multiple levels. So at what age were you sexually abused?
Between the ages of 8 and 10.
And do you
multiple times between the ages of 8 and 10.
Do you know why like what about you gave the sign of like I'm a walking carbon, like I'm a walking sacrifice, like pick me?
You know, it's interesting. I'll tell you what's interesting about that question. So when a lot of my journey was getting to a meeting with him, you know, that a lot of my story was I wanted to sit and speak with this guy and meet him. And from the moment I decided that I want this meeting to take place till it happened was about a 5-year journey. You can imagine the ups and downs through that and everything else. It was a very important, in my own story, these chapters were filled with drama. Certainly eventually getting to meet this gentleman who in my mind had robbed me of my childhood. And when I eventually did sit down with him, and for anyone interested in that story, I have a video on YouTube. I call it Secrets for Jewish Community Watch. So it's about 10 years ago, I shared the story and I went into a lot of the elements of eventually getting to meet with him. And the final straw was through Jewish Community Watch, through Mayor Seawolf from Jewish Community Watch, who reached out to him. And at that point, the pressure was too much and he agreed to finally have this meeting with me. And when I did, my first question for him was why? Why of all the little kids on the block did you choose me? And the way I'll answer this question is in 2 ways. The first I will say is, earlier you said that we can't heal ourselves with the same mind that we're polluting ourselves with. So that question feels resolved, and I never answered the question. Right. It doesn't need to be answered directly. Why did you choose me? But it did feel so important for a time that I couldn't move on without answering this question until you can tell me why you chose me. Why didn't you choose anyone else? As if he knows the answer. Right. And eventually it felt like fate of sorts. You know, I felt in some way that I chose this experience before I came into this world. And there was a time in which I felt like I chose this as a way to help, as a way to heal my family. I think that every family kind of has its dysfunction. And if you want to dysfunction, because my parents may get triggered by those words, I'll use has bad ideas. Right? We all have bad ideas. If you want to understand a society which is decaying, it's because a lot of bad ideas have infiltrated into this society. It's like we just have a lot of poor ideas that don't have substance, that don't have longevity, that don't have eternality, and they've become too commonplace in the society. And then the society starts to decay and fall apart. Right? So, and then you have good ideas which help bolster and everything else. So one of the bad ideas in my family, and it's one that I've seen in others as well, but one of the bad ideas was that problems are okay. It's a normal part of life to have problems. And while there's a truth in everything, right, there's some truth in that idea, it's a very dangerous idea to hold too strongly, because then we can become tolerant of everything and accept everything. You say, okay, it's not so bad. It's not so bad. This is life. Life is problematic. Life is challenges, and move forward and move on. Instead of saying like, no, this is unacceptable. Like, why should we live like this? Why should we live poor? Why should we live in fear? Why should we live with anxiety? Why should we live with depression? Why should we live with poor relationships? Why should we live with so many of these things? And I think that most kind of stuff that happened in my family went into that category of like, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. And I'm sure there are many things that if they happened would have woken us up, my family up, to the opposite of this idea. That no problems are a problem. Right? We have to have, in my view, we have to have a very low tolerance for, in a good, healthy society, in a good, healthy individual, we have to have a very low tolerance for things that are off. Not that we should get overwhelmed by it, but as soon as we see it, it's like, why should I have it? Why should I have fear? Why should I have anxiety? Why should there be negativity in a relationship? Let's deal with it. Let's deal with it at its infancy instead of waiting till it metastasizes into this massive problem that overwhelms all of us. Like, let's address things at a small level and not wait for them to spin out of control. Now, I'm sure there are many more things that could have got my family's attention. I think sexual abuse was right at that level. Child sexual abuse was right at that level that, like, the most compassionate, right? Like, for example, I mean, not to, if someone lost their life, for example, I'm sure it would wake everyone up, right? So we can agree that that is worse than sexual abuse. As bad as sexual abuse is, we're still on this planet. I think that sexual abuse hit that perfect
crescendo.
Yes, of enough truth and enough compassion delivered to our family to say, okay, like, we're all still here, but this is not okay. And it felt like as soon as I shared that with my parents, I was like, okay, like, we got to do something about this. Like, this one is not okay.
How old were you when you shared it?
I was probably 23 or 24 when I shared it with my dad, and 27, 28 when I shared it with my mom.
Oh.
So, I think my dad kept it from my mom for a time, but eventually I shared it with her. And both didn't feel that it was okay. My mom especially didn't feel that it was okay. Like, she did a lot to push us, like, to bring it to resolution. She was the one who called JCW. She had a real fight about her when I brought it to her. All that to say is that, like, now the answer of why, while I've answered the question, I haven't answered in the way the question was asked. It's like, why did he pick me? Like, I don't have to get into that setting. But
Right.
for myself to say, hey, here was an opportunity to free a family from a terrible idea that was going to have much worse ramifications than just sexual abuse. I'm honored to take that on, and I know that I haven't delivered the message perfectly yet. I'm still working on myself to be able to bring that home. And then on a larger scale, I think that when it comes to sexuality, this concept of sexuality, we got to do better. We got to do much better as a society. When you talk about ideas that are eternal, right? When I say eternal, there's an idea that we can build off this idea. And a society living with this idea can live for generations and generations and generations. Like, these ideas can sustain itself. I think about, oftentimes we like go to a spiritual way of explaining something so quickly versus like a very practical way. It's like the Torah preserved us. It was like, the Torah, we're going to hug it. No, it's like there are ideas inside here that if we retain these ideas, like, they will preserve us for eternity. And, like, for example, in the Torah, you see a lot of very, very careful instruction around sexuality. It's like, why? Why? Is it to take something away from us, to take pleasure away from us? Or is it that it's so essential for a person to be eternal, for a world to be eternal, that we have to have we have to hold sexuality so sacred so as to allow it to, this society, to keep going. And a society which doesn't hold sexuality sacred doesn't last long. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. If two parents are not holding their sexuality sacred, what kind of life are their children having? They're not growing up in a healthy environment. If their parents are sleeping with other people, right? The children are not growing up in a healthy environment. Right or wrong, Gavin?
100%. I'm just.
So what I'm saying, just to bring it back full circle to your question, is that originally I answered the question, which answered the question means I felt I had a responsibility to deliver a certain message to my family, is that problems are problems. If someone is 20 pounds overweight, like, that is a problem. Like, why do we have to wait till it's totally falling apart to do something about it? Someone doesn't have to have a heart attack before
Right.
they go to a doctor. There were many warning signs before then. So I feel like that's a powerful message that I delivered, notwithstanding the fact that I'm not perfectly in the physical shape that I want to be. Notwithstanding that concept is a problem, right? And it's a message I'm trying to deliver. And then on a broader scale is recognizing that sexuality specifically is something that the world we need to be so much more careful with. And I hope to be someone who can deliver that message in a way that doesn't sound like a punishment.
Right.
Like, oh, here comes the Bible. Like the Bible came like, don't do this, don't do this, don't do that. No, not from that place. Hopefully it can be delivered and heard. Wait, we have to hold the sacred. If we don't hold the sacred, our children don't stand a chance at living a healthy life. And we don't stand a chance of building a society that's eternal, that can build off itself. Like this idea is not an eternal idea. Running after sexual pleasure is a very, very, very destructive idea. A society can't last more than a couple of generations. And if you want to know one of the foundational ideas that has allowed Judaism to be in existence for thousands of years is holding sexuality sacred. And if you go too far with the idea in one or the other direction that sexuality is unimportant, we can cut it off like other religions have, that's not a sustainable idea. And if you go to, okay, let's do whatever the hell we want with sexuality, well, what kind of life are we giving our children? That's not a good life.
Right. So
not a sustainable life.
So I'm getting a little triggered. And the reason is because you come from a family where sexual purity was held, according to the book.
Maybe.
Or
they didn't tell me otherwise.
My assumption is you come from an ultra-Orthodox family, and maybe, right. Okay. I'm making an assumption, but what I'm trying to get at is it seems that your verbal impotence was a major driver behind your lack of healthy, attuned intimacy. That the inability to have a safe space to be you and to work out you.
Yes.
Create a massive leakage.
Yes.
Irregardless of what the book said.
Yes. 100%.
Right? And in my life, I went the route, I ended up in the route of the book, and it didn't help anything. Everything fell apart, according to, and when I hear your story, what touches my heart the most, and really, like, besides for waking up your family, doing all these things, is it all started with relatively much smaller problems of, I'm a human being. I want to be talked to like a human being. I want to be loved like a human being. I want to be cared for as a human being. And if the book is not giving that message, then what's the point of the book? The book, the value that the book gives it's just a book. And I think, to add a little bit of Torah into here, I think that's why Torah Shabbat Peh was a verbal process. It was something that once you put it into a book and the book became the teacher and the example no longer became the teacher, then there's a breakdown of the lineage. Moshe's teaching, he's transmitting, we're leading by example. We're humans, we're sensitive human beings. And then we can build a foundation for a healthy sexual space. Because if you're going to give me Torah from a book, and I've been through it, you're choking me in another way. Okay, so all of a sudden I need to, like, I'm a robot. It's I'm good or bad, I'm bad or good. I don't have a space of, how do I enter a marriage when all I did was avoid the feminine?
So I agree with you on everything you're saying. Where are you hearing something from me that sounds differently than
No, it's just that this is why I get this is my trigger point from the way that you deliver a lot of times your message. It seems too similar to how to the world I come from like my parents, like my mother's world, who became very religious, and the yeshiva world, which is like, we need to preserve sexual for the generations. And it's like, what the fuck does that mean?
Okay. So I was making a very logical point, right? I was making a very logical point that actually has nothing to do with Torah or religion. So, like, if you're hearing that, to me, that's your own,
right.
That's your own sensitivities there. What I was saying is that just think about it practically. Okay, I have two societies, and the only thing I tell you about the two societies is that in one, they hold sexuality very sacred. And I was actually careful to say that we don't go too far to the extreme, because sexual shame is a massive problem that gets suppressed in one generation, and then the next generation pops out in very poor ways, right? Which no doubt happened to me, and I'm sure many others, right? So it's not something that just, oh, do this and then you're good sexually. No, this is a very, very powerful energy, sexuality, that we can go too far to the right and too far to the left with it. And it's a continuous process to get it perfect. And perfect doesn't exist. Also, it's a continuous process to get it more perfect. I was thinking this week, Avi Wolf shared about Yaakov Avinu. That Yaakov, it says that his first child was his first emission.
Right.
And we'd speak about him as like, right, mitasa shlema, like he was the perfect specimen. So let's include that in that as well, that this is something that let's just assume that the average person does not accomplish this one, which gives us some breathing room around our sexuality. We're not talking about getting it perfect. That's not the baseline. And continuing to impose those ideas on someone, that if they masturbate one time, then they're destined for hell and they've done worse than a Holocaust because of the potential babies in each one. These are not ideas that are helpful. They're not. They're another example of a toxic idea that may get conformity in practice for a period of time until it doesn't. And then it blows up in all sorts of ways. So I'm certainly not talking about that. And I've made this point many times on this podcast. What I'm talking about is practically. If I tell you have two societies, and in one society there's the idea that everyone can sleep with everyone. Everyone. Okay, that's complete sexual freedom. If it feels good, do it. And in another one, there's a lot of sacredness around sexuality, where it exists in the context of marriage and with intimacy and closeness, and people don't have sex until marriage and all of those things, right? So I'm giving two extremes. Can you see how children being raised in the first extreme aren't living in a very healthy environment?
So, yes and no.
Go ahead.
Very much. It's like very much yes and no.
Go ahead.
Because, and I can only, my best is using the communities that I'm familiar with. I'm familiar with the Chabad community. And I'm familiar, like, post-divorce with secular Israelis and secular Jews and people I do business with. And, my kid went 1 year to a private school that wasn't Jewish, and I saw how American, healthy, quote unquote, successful American families look like. And in the religious world, there's a lot of leakage because there isn't, intimacy wasn't put on a pedestal.
It wasn't. First of all, I never compared the religious world. You keep hearing something I'm not saying. I never compared the religious world.
Okay, so you're talking about a new society.
Yes. If we believe in Jewish ideas, then we have to believe that the religious world is not getting a lot of things right.
Right.
A lot of things right.
Right.
Because part of the ideas that are shared there is that if the Jewish people get it right, then the world will be right. Right. So that's part of what we share, right? There's part of the idea. So obviously, if we're seeing a problem somewhere else, there's a problem here. And I would say, yes, part of the problem is that there is not a lot of sacredness around sexuality. There is not a lot. It's not treated as this holy, special, amazing thing. That's not the message I got. I was taught that it's disgusting and shameful and something to be afraid of. Yes. Very bad ideas in very different ways. Very different ways. So I gave you two mythical societies.
Okay, mythical.
Mythical societies. And I just want to know, one, right, where sexuality is free and loose. Even I'll do better. Compare what we know about America in the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, and today. So let's not, okay, so that kind of society, right, where sexuality had there was a certain reverence for it. If a movie was made, we didn't just put a sex scene in every other one, as an example. And now where we have like post-sexual revolution, where it's gone way beyond that. If a movie doesn't have a sex scene, it's almost what's going on. I'll give you I'll give you a good example of this. I saw someone once talking and said that in this post-sexual revolution, someone who isn't sexually promiscuous has to do the explaining. If someone
Right.
chooses chastity, if someone
Right.
chooses
Right.
no sex before marriage, then they have to do the explaining. They're called prudes. They're
Right.
labeled with all sorts of identifiers. So let's take those two worlds, right? Can you see how one leads to much less children, for example? Just that.
Interesting.
One world leads to much less children than the other.
Help me with the association.
If I really want sex and the only way to get it is to get married,
I mean, it's a pretty sad way to like.
or you take with the sexual revolution came all of these things around condoms and protection and everything
Right.
else, right? Which are like they go hand in hand with it. But if you take those things outside of, if you take those things out, in order to get sex, for a while there was a family component. Sex and family went hand in hand. It's known that a society that has something that has less than 2.2 children per family, something like that, eventually dies out. Right? Because if we're a male and female, right? A male and female come together and they don't have at least 2 children, then less has come from before. So you have many societies, especially in Asia, where the average number of children is less than the amount of the parents. That's any idea that's in society is not going to be able to survive.
As a side note, that has nothing to do with sexual freedom
It does have to do with sexual freedom.
in Asia.
Oh no, it doesn't have to do with sexual freedom. I'm not saying it does. There are other reasons. They impose it in other ways. But what I'm saying is, with sexual freedom, those ideas happen. Right? One of the byproducts of sexual freedom is people get married later, people start families later, people have smaller families. This is not very. If I'm trying to build a society for generations, not for one, but build a society for generations, and there are certain ideas that have sustainable, eternal and sustainable type of ideas, then sacred sexuality is one of those, and sexual promiscuity is guaranteed. I gave one example.
Correct.
Guaranteed to lead to
Correct.
decay. So number one, you can have smaller families, which by itself is not going to allow to produce, right? Eventually, to continue on. Eventually, that society, whatever it is, right? So we look at Judaism, and it's survived 3,500 years. And you look at some of the most powerful enemies that we've had, the Greek, the Romans, the Egyptians, and many of the Iranian, the Persians, right? They all don't exist. So we can ascribe a miracle to it, or we can say there were ideas in this society that weren't sustainable. It didn't allow it to build on itself. So eventually it self-destructed. And there were ideas in this society that were eternal, that had certain sustainable values. And while there are challenges, I'll be the first to say, while there are challenges there, we have to be honest and say, hey, this society survived 3,500 years. These guys didn't survive 300. What happened? Were there certain ideas that...
You think that Judaism has a more sacred approach to sexuality than Islam?
In actuality, I mean, you're not comparing religions,
No,
but
just because
I think that
for the survival.
I think ideally, religions have, like in what they're trying to teach, religions try to teach more sacredness around sexuality. And I don't think it's to punish anyone.
Right.
I think that it's, if you want to build something sustainable, then if you want to build a sustainable life, right, you have to produce more than you expend.
So that's
an idea, right?
Yeah, you're going on the bent of sexual sacredness. You think it's healthy and to learn all your sexuality from one partner for your entire life?
Let me say it this way. I think most men would agree that they wish their wife did. Okay?
Right.
So instead of answering that question for you, right, which sometimes it becomes very, very personal
Right.
for us and you feel like someone's judging or someone else, I just want to know, you eventually plan to get married.
Correct.
Okay, how excited will you be to hear that she had multiple partners before you, or how excited would you be to hear that she had none? Regardless of what's realistic or not realistic, what do you want?
So that's a good question. I've thought about it often. And I much more prefer to be with someone who knows something about something than to be with someone who doesn't know anything. And I mean, like for someone to teach me something and to have the experience of success and failure.
You talking life or sex?
I mean, life and sex, what's the difference?
I don't know.
You know what I mean? Like, I would find it awkward to have a partner in her 30s who never had any of the other partners. It would actually make me feel very uncomfortable. I've dated women.
So that's a different, I imagine you're saying something different, right? Because in our society, what does that say about a person? Right? Meaning in our society, that's not common. So how did a person arrive at 35 years old with no sexual partners?
Right.
Like there's going to be, unless I'm putting words in your mouth, but I can't imagine that all things being equal, a man would want a woman who slept with multiple other people versus someone who's virgin. I can't imagine it.
I don't know. Like, I mean, I'm practical about it. Like, it's just like, do I want a partner who's been cushioned her entire life and who never had any like adversity and never really developed and just kind of like lived under the shell of her parents, versus someone who went through experiences and has wisdom to share to actually give strength to building a family and to go through challenges together. Yes, of course, I wouldn't want to be with I prefer someone who is able to hone it in. in real world, I don't want someone right out of the nylon wrap. Like, I mean,
so let me share it this way, right? Which I think is more easily understood. So in the Talmud, it says that if someone feels an uncontrollable urge to act out, they should dress in black, go to a town where no one knows them, do what they need to do, and come back.
Right.
Right. You're familiar with this?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. So what is it saying? You know how I understand it?
Yeah.
Okay. So we have sexual appetites. We do. And sometimes it's a very, very, very powerful force. And none of us are going to get this 100% right. But let's not take great pride in failure in this area. If we need to, we need to.
Correct. I got it.
But let's not hold it to the highest standards that a guy has slept with tons of women. I'm not 1,000% sure why Hugh Hefner is held in a completely different category than Jeffrey Epstein. I can't completely wrap my head around two men in their 60s, 70s, 80s who are going after women that are 2 or 3 years different. And one is considered someone to look up to and the other one is considered someone to look down on. Why are they not the same? Help me understand. What happened? Someone arbitrarily threw a line in the sand of 18 years old. So you have a 70, 80-year-old guy sleeping with tons of 18, 19-year-old women, and they're celebrated. Documentaries are made about them. No, this is not something to be proud of. This is not a life to hold in high esteem.
Something comes to me. I mean, and you're gonna have to help me with the association. We were in a circle, and somebody was mentioning about how he slept with prostitutes, and he shared that when he told me, I was disgusted by it. Specific type of prostitute, and you just zigged me like straight to the gut. You're like, well, you know why? It's because you have your own shame about it, right? You're like, so if I'm judging someone else, it's because there's something that lives inside of me that I haven't resolved. So just, it's interesting the extreme between Hugh Hefner and Jeffrey Epstein, where one's hated and one's
Celebrated,
right?
It's bizarre.
It's bizarre, but what I think is that with it comes from the same place. It gives both opportunity. One's I can hate it, right, and then I can allow myself to I can live in my shame freely and openly, and I can have both experiences, kind of, because I hate myself for what I'm doing.
And you know where they're both coming from, in my opinion?
From where?
Shame.
Right.
Yes.
You know, it's like
That one person is feeling so much shame that they have no way to talk to and process. I'm not getting into Epstein's head or Hugh Hefner's head. I'm just the concept, the caricature of one person is feeling so much shame, no one to talk to about it, no one to process, no way to deal with this. So ends up in this endless cycle of acting out, feeling guilt, acting out, feeling guilt, and on it goes. And another one says, I'm done with feeling this sumo wrestler on top of me.
right,
I'm just going to do whatever the hell I want.
right.
If you take it all the way down to its core,
Yeah.
there's a shamelessness. There's a shame behind the shamelessness. There's so much shame there that just says, okay, I'm just going to do whatever I want anyways. So on someone's individual experience, I don't think there's any room to put judgment. I don't know someone's sexual appetite story. Who am I to sit here married and talk to you about your life when you haven't been married for 10 years? I'm not. I'm certainly not. Of course not. What I'm saying is, as a society, we have certain ideas. And the way we speak about those things, if we celebrate some things, there are consequences to those ideas. And the consequences are not God coming out of the sky and punishing anyone. That's not what's going to happen. The consequences are that these are bad ideas that don't work. When you have a generation of men which have been raised on pornography, this is bad news. That's just a fact. This is not a punishment. It's not because someone violated a law of God and God is arbitrarily punishing them. It's because natural law was violated. You cannot take tons and tons of men and all of their energy and drive and intensity is spewed out in their bedroom to a computer screen instead of in the real world creating and doing and nurturing relationships and whatever else our sexual energy allows us to do. There's consequences to that.
Correct. And I kind of want to go back to our discussion about multiple women versus one woman in your life. In the idea, we're going back to this idealized version of this mythical society. I would love to have one woman who has extremely high emotional intelligence, who reveres intimacy, who can stand in the fire, who's fully present, and have that. And when I'm actually listening to what we're talking about, I'm like, that's actually what it should be. That's really what it should be. The reason why that doesn't excite me is because I've lost some faith in society. That I kind of feel that you have to go through the hard knocks to get to that point, to actually appreciate being in a monogamous one person for life kind of situation. It's kind of like indicative of the disease that I kind of like have appreciated life with.
Yeah, you're also not living in the ideal anymore, right? Your first marriage didn't work out, but if you got married at 21 to a woman that you really connected with, and you had a monogamous relationship, but not a monogamous relationship where you didn't sleep with anyone else, a monogamous relationship where you slept with each other a lot,
right? And
that was a big part of your life and very fulfilling and everything. That's the ideal. That is the ideal. And in that, then we wouldn't be having this conversation. Of course not. Right? So sometimes it's hard to think about ourselves in it. What do you want for your children? You want 3 marriages? You want 77 partners?
No, I don't. Of course I don't. Of course I don't. I want them to be there to be as. I mean, that's a great question. That's a great question. I have a 15-year-old daughter, and I think about her future and what's the best route. You know, she grew up in a home that was loaded with trauma between her parents, and I mean, the nice thing about her actually is because she has so much trauma, she doesn't trust men, so she doesn't jump in and do things a lot of her friends are already doing at this stage. But yeah, and ideally, I wanted to have one partner, and to be able to be explorative with him, and for them to have a beautiful union together.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's what we want. And what I'll say differently is like to take religion out of this because it mixes in so much of our own shame into the mix, but just take religion out of it, is that a society which has allowed sexuality to be extremely loose does not have a lot of longevity. I would bet on that. It's not going to make enough kids, and the kids they're going to make are not going to make enough kids, and it's certainly not going to make enough healthy kids, and it's certainly not going to give safe environments for them to build healthy and fruitful and productive lives. It's not. It's not. For my children to have the best life, me and my wife have to sleep only with each other.
Right. Amen. I heard a good line. Sometimes Instagram gives good lines. This guy says that if you can find God in your relationship, in your intimacy with your wife, you will not desire, and you won't have it. You'll be satisfied with your one wife. But if you cannot find God in women, there will never be a woman that will ever satisfy you.
Fascinating.
And
okay, so I'm not there yet. So right now you're just talking ideas. now you're just talking ideas that are triggering me.
But I got to tell you something that you said that like part triggered me, part inspires the heck out of me, which I really love, is that you said you had to unlearn religion completely and relearn it. Like it's the program that you were given, and then and now we're talking about sexuality. It's almost like the way that sexuality was explained to you by the book had to completely be thrown out, and you had to start from olive base again.
Yeah, we were taught a lot of bad ideas, a lot of really, really bad ideas. But tell me why it speak more, and then I have something.
Well, I mean, there's so much information. It's like it's an information addiction that the orthodoxy has. It's like the higisa bayom of alayla, which is, in my estimation, is a really special idea of like living with the divine all day and all night, got reduced to just information compilement shoving into your brain. And then like you said about the chassid, you create this status that you need to live on. You're not actually like connecting to anything. You're doing things because that is your ticket into the society. And then what's happening? What are you doing? You're just an amazing monkey. You're like a terrific monkey, like an exceptional one, where you can do Mishnah's Baal Peh, and you can learn all the halachas, and you wear your hat and jacket a certain way, and the button goes in a certain way, and you're doing all these things. But when your child is crying, you can't look him in the eye and be a grounding force there. So it's like, and Avi Wolf spoke about this. He sees Bachar in their 20s, and he's like, it's a monkey see, monkey do, and once you when I hear you speak a lot of times, you step out of it, and you're like, you look at it, like you said about mezuzahs, for example, like someone talks about some kind of mystical thing, it sounds crazy, but we go and we touch a mezuzah all day, and if there's a letter missing inside of it, like the world is coming to an end.
Right.
Right? Like, what are we doing? What are we doing?
Just to explain the point is that we live these mystical ideas, we practice them, but we don't believe in mysticism in a lot of ways.
Right.
Right. Yes.
So that was really refreshing for me to hear you say that, because I went very high in the religion. Like, I opened a shul, I would teach, I really lived in it. And life just threw me off my high horse like 110%. And to the point that, like, in my behavior, there was nothing left. I mean, it was plenty still deeper inside me. And then it's like, if I'm going to go back to religion, the ideas have to stand. And on my healing journey, it started with the non-Jewish world. It was a few years of complete, Richard Schwartz's of the world. I mean, Michael Singer is Jewish. They're both Jewish, ironically.
Yeah.
But these ideas, and working through them, and then being like, oh, that was in our books too.
Yes.
That's kind of cool. And it's like the vocabulary and the language in our books, it's a challenge because look, we're giving this great treasure, but it's like it's given in a very, very high level of verbiage, of language, and then the practitioners of it that are teaching it are kind of faking like they're actually doing it. And where am I? Where is this? Where is this? Well, right? And I have to go back into this. I have to go back into the sacred world. I have to go into meditation. I have to go to Eastern. I have to go all over the place because they brought it down to Dir B'Tachtonim. They brought it down to Olam Hazeh in a way.
Not necessarily, though. So I'll correct one thing. Not necessarily. I would imagine that Michael Singer's children, for example, if he has a child,
Right.
would have the same challenge in those, that the words have become polluted in some way because we've seen the human nature, the hypocrisy
Right.
of anyone. And I'm not calling out Michael Singer specifically. I'm sure he's a great guy. But what I'm saying is that for whatever society we're going to grow up in that's run and led by humans, we're going to see the hypocrisy in some way between the ideal world they're painting and the words they're using and the life they're living. And that gap, if we're not taught it by people who are telling us that the gap exists, right? If like they're trying to play with us in some way to pretend the gap doesn't exist when we feel it exists, then the words itself can get polluted. I think what you said about Torah Shabbat Peh is 100% spot on, that there was a price to pay by putting certain concepts inside a book. I don't know if you saw the podcast I did with Zach Gould.
Yeah, I think so.
So we spoke about that at Lent because Zach is approaching these concepts, virgin and new, and like, wow, this is amazing. And it's like, you have all this instruction and all this direction. I said, not quite, because all that instruction and direction wasn't given to us with the personal flavor and personal touch that we needed at the time. So certain times it became, an eagle that woke us up too abruptly. These ideas that were shared in very harsh and ways that were uncontainable to us at the time. Like, I don't need these ideas as a 14, 15-year-old about your sexual perfection, right? The same ideas that I'm sharing today around sexuality cannot be contained by a 14, 15, 16-year-old just coming to terms with their sexuality. These are not kind and compassionate
That's
concepts and ideas. They're not. So either we got to say it when we say it, or like in some way give someone an experience. It's also very, it's very presumptuous of me to compare my life to someone who's not married, to compare my life to someone who's, 15, 16 years old. We're in completely different places. At 40 years old, our sex drive has taken a massive nosedive. We're not the same as a 20-year-old kid. Like, where do we come off talking to them about how they should live with their sexual life? I can share my experience, but if anyone is getting a sense of judgment or guilt or shame by the words I'm saying, then they're not hearing the message, because it's meant to be exactly the opposite. And if we are getting it from them, in my experience, if I'm getting infected with sexual shame, it's because the person has sexual shame. The person who's speaking has sexual shame.
What comes to me from what you're sharing is that as we evolve in this journey, like the sensitivity factors has to rise, like betem, like in parallel with the learnings, with the epiphanies, and with the ideas. And that's the responsibility of leadership, where if you're teaching something of such high consequence, you got to realize that the dissonance is massive. And like, it's not only someone who knows Aleph teach Aleph. If you know the whole Aleph base, you still need to teach Aleph. And it gives me compassion towards the teachers and rabbis who because as I come back toward like those original downloads are re-uploading back into my system. but it's a circuitous kind of,
Yeah, we have to get they were downloaded with the virus.
yeah.
Wipe it clean and re-download it.
Right, and I'm saying also, but it's also like expecting them to deliver it accurately is also a tall order.
Yes.
It's a tall order. They don't have, it's not necessarily do they have ill intent.
No, and I'll tell you something, Yoni. That they are fast becoming us. We're 40 years old. We don't get to.
Right.
Who is they we're pointing to? We're not 10. We're not 15.
Right.
Like now it's us. For our kids, we are the they. For kids growing up today, I mean, we're sitting here with microphones. We are the they. We've become the they, and it's important for us to teach the lessons that we've learned. We're far from perfect, and there are many other areas which our kids are going to show us that we didn't get right about, right? That's how the world continuously evolves.
Right.
But certainly in these that we're talking about, our parents didn't get right, and I'm sure there are other things they got right, and there are many reasons why they didn't get certain things right, and hopefully we can share these with the younger generation in a way that is more helpful, more sustainable, and more robust, more compassionate, more truthful.
It's super liberating to be able to find compassion towards those that came before me, my parents and my teachers, because once they start waking up, it's really like going down into the you, going down into
yes.
Then you have to feel the hatred. I have to feel the pain. I have to feel the resentment. I have to feel it because they're all true.
Yes.
It's a real experience, and I have to actually know what happened to me.
Yes.
And then it's like, well, this happens to everybody.
Right. Then we get to release it.
Yeah.
Then we get to release it. And then at some point, then we get to realize that we are that character in someone else's story.
Right.
Like the hats that we wear, like you often call me triggering, right? That in someone else's story, for some people, I'm probably more than triggering, right? For some people, I can be the villain in their story and recognize that whoever,
right,
like in your dad had a villain in his story,
right,
but in your story, you're his villain. When in your story, he's your villain.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, just the Nazis.
What?
Just the Nazis.
Just the Nazis, right? Right. But right, so it's recognizing that we sit with those roles, and even when we have that role, I know it's for many parents when their children are coming with complaints, or I had an experience on Adama. We do something where you'll have the opportunity to bring complaints forward. And it's been more than once that I've been pulled into to the middle of the room for that. And there was one which, sometimes someone brings something up, which 100%, that's like, I did that on me, you're right. Like 100%. Other times they made it up. I say they completely made it up. And there was one where I got pulled into another room, and this guy's really upset at me, really upset. And the hardest part about it was that it was something that happened very early in the retreat, the first morning. And here we were on the last day of the retreat. So he's sitting with all of that for a few days. And as I'm sitting with him, I said, okay, he's like, I want to complain. So what's your complaint? He said, you said you were going to lead a meditation. And I came there. He said, like, Mayor's leading one meditation and you're leading one meditation. And I came there and you weren't there. I said, well, I didn't say that. I said something else. I don't lead meditations. Right? It hasn't happened. But as I'm sitting with him, I saw, like, eye to eye, right? 1.5 feet, 2 feet apart. I see the sheer pain in this other human being's life and experience. And I woke that up. Like, there was nothing to say other than I woke that up, and this guy lived in it for 3 days on account of something I did or didn't do. I certainly wasn't clear, and I certainly could have handled that situation better, but I didn't say what he thought I said. And in sitting with him, it was like this rush of emotions came out of him. All of these emotions. And eventually I was able to say, well, that didn't happen. I didn't say that. I'll definitely be more careful in the future if I'm giving similar instructions on how we're dividing the groups, exactly what I'm doing. I certainly didn't say that, but at the same point in time, I see this human having a very painful experience in front of me on account of something I did. And we ended up processing it, and since then we've had, multiple nice conversations, etc. But I think for many parents, when they're pulled into that, and I don't know what I'll do as a parent. The only thing I can hope is that Adama has taught me that at some point in time, I'll likely have to absorb things from my children that I did or didn't do that caused them pain, and being able to sit there with it. I didn't deny it at first. I sat there with him. I took in the fullness of his pain, his experience. Mayor had the opportunity to ask him what it brought up in him. What were the feelings? Give some words to those feelings. And then only after those things, then I went into, okay, let me tell you what I said and didn't say, and let me tell you what I learned from it, right? And we're able to have that experience. I think for many parents, when they end up finding out that they're the villain in their child's story in some way, or that they brought these painful emotions, they run. Versus, I think this is another example of something that we don't have to identify with so strongly, but we do have to put the hat on long enough for that role to run its course. So for this moment, I am the villain. I wear the hat. I take it on. We'll go through it. And then afterwards, I get to take it off and recognize that wasn't me. It wasn't me before. It wasn't me during. It wasn't me afterwards. It's not who I am as a human being. Even if it was something that I did, it doesn't become me. I can stop identifying with it so strongly. And those are the opportunities for liberation over and over again.
It's amazing when the heat comes in and we can absorb it, but not identify with it. The healing that happens. Like I've had some challenge with my 15-year-old daughter lately. And I'm trying to create a container for her, what school to go to, when to wake up, and she doesn't like it. Doesn't like it one bit. And we went at it a little bit, and there was certain points where this is just too crazy. Like I gotta put my foot down. This is too crazy. And then my crazy goes into a whole nother level of crazy from her end, to the end where she's like, your wife left you, your friends leave you, and I'm gonna leave you.
Oh wow.
And then I'm sitting and I'm talking, and I just, at that moment, I just switched. I switched from being on the offensive to telling I'm sorry that you're going through that pain, and I just want you to know that it's really, really hard to be a single father, and I'm doing everything that I can. And my nephew was staying with me, and I have a nanny, and I got a nanny special for you, and I brought my nephew so you can have fun in that. And I just hope that you can see how hard I'm trying, and she kept that. I mean, I don't know the better way to say it, but the resting bitch face. She kept it going, but our relationship changed from that moment on. I kind of I took it, and she was the deal we had with him, how she's going to school and waking up, and everything worked itself out. It literally just everything worked itself out after I just I let her dump all that pain onto me, an excessive amount of pain, and stay in the fire.
Right. What do you feel like shifted the conversation? What was it that she saw in you that she didn't see previously?
Well, I was able to stay firm and be like a lightning bolt that was holding the fire while she was, right? Because it's one thing to be like, oh, I'm sorry, baby, and kind of be meekish about it. It's you didn't hold it for me. I just blew you.
Right. Just overwhelmed you. Yeah.
I just bulldozed you. But I didn't. I was able to actually be able to let her know energetically that she's being out of her mind. But I don't. But at this, I was holding her. I was able to hold her and take what she was saying as pain as opposed as for truth, and still be her dad. Because what she wanted deep in her core, she wanted me to be her father. Because I hear certain people that when their kids go crazy at them, they start apologizing and they're like, I'm sorry. It's it was more. It wasn't. I wasn't. It wasn't. I saw her, but I also saw myself, and she saw that she had a father that she can lean onto when her life was falling apart, and her life was falling apart in her mind.
Yes.
Her life was falling apart at that moment. I was coming at her. I was telling her what to do. Her mother abandoned her. I mean, she didn't have like her stability, like the things in her life that she had going on. She was in a volleyball team that stopped working out. Like a lot of things unraveled, and she knew that I could be the place where she can let out that depth of pain, and I could feel it, and I can be hurt by it, and I also can stand in the fire and walk out, like they say, Rabbi Akiva, Nicholas B'Shalom, V'yatza B'Shalom.
Right.
I was like, all right, we're done.
Right. Okay, so originally when we sat down to speak, the idea was that it was going to be more of a like an interview where you're going to interview me, right? A couple of months ago I put on Instagram that
Right.
I thought it'd be neat because people come to the podcast, the only thing they know from me for some people is the podcast. Certain people have followed my journey more and saw me talking with JCW and sharing some more painful experiences, and then eventually talking about pornography. But some are coming to this new and now, and I thought it'd be helpful to be on the other end of it as a way to, I don't know, just kind of put the
Right.
switch hats from the interviewer role to being the one interviewed. It's not exactly the way it worked out, which is awesome because I thought our conversation was important, but it ended up being more of a conversation. But on that note, if you do have another question or two, I did want to make sure we take the opportunity to
Well, thank
to
you.
answer those.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I do have two more questions, but a lot of them are a result, a tolda of our exchange with each other, of our communication, and how I've learned from you and what I've grappled with. So I thought that would also be it's kind of an interview with a twist.
Yes. It was one of the reasons why, there were a number of people who reached out about interviewing, and one of the, I don't know if reasons, I don't know that I make my decisions complete with reasons. It felt right. So I went with it, but logically, I felt like you had actual questions for me.
Right.
So there was genuine intrigue or curiosity or unresolved questions, which would make it for a much more unique conversation than someone who may not know me and ask me where I was born, where I'm from. So I thought, hey, you have genuine questions. And also the challenge of it, that I had no idea what you were going to ask or where you were going to take it, excited me versus, what I thought with others may just be a typical discussion. So by all means, bring up what are the questions that are true to you.
This is another question. It's very related to our time together. During our last Adama, you led a session where I did a new funeral for my father, where I was able to lay him to rest, and I didn't have to burden myself with the story of the challenge of being his son and the poor information that he transmitted to me. And I was very open to, and I really surrendered, and I appreciated that. I was able to go to that place, and you took me far beyond what I could have unraveling that story. And ironically, it's so spiritual. My brother passed away. It was several weeks or like two. When was the demo? Was in October, I think.
Makes sense, yeah.
And he passed away Erev Yom Kippur.
A couple weeks later.
A couple weeks later.
Yeah.
So it was very spiritual, having that kind of laying my father to rest, and then that kind of ushered my brother for him, and my brother didn't go to his funeral.
In the discussions, as I recall, at the Adama, there were also a lot of conversation around your brother and that relationship as well. So it wasn't two totally disconnected things. Your brother came up in that very much.
Right.
And to be clear for those listening, your brother is 20 or 25 years older than you.
He's 25 22.
There's a half brother from
Yeah,
previous
half
marriage.
brother,
Yeah.
right? I mean, at the end of it, you mentioned, I don't know how it segued, but you said something, and you said it, and I just burst out into tears. Where I asked you about your relationship with your father.
I won't be surprised if at some point in time, a lot of these ideas that I find helpful and meaningful in my life, that at some point in time he adopts or understands or takes in. I think that, I had a ayahuasca experience, one of my first ones, where I don't know who it is who says that we, like, certainly all sons want the approval of their father, right? And we're searching for this in some way, and we want it. And I had an experience where it turned a couple of these ideas on its head, right? So, which will connect well to this conversation. Number one was that if I'm of value and useful to someone, right? If there's something that's changing in the environment, right? If I introduce anything into this environment that's valuable, then it's changing the environment in some way. So, for example, if I put an air conditioner in this because it's warm, or if I put a heater because it's too cold, so now I'm changing the environment in some way. If I put something in here that all it does is make things stay the same, then there wasn't anything new introduced. Okay. Now, when I'm introducing something new, the greater the gift, so to speak, the greater the disruption, the greater the change is felt.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, seeing it from the standpoint of a family, and we often think of father and child as, the father is meant to teach a child. And in this was yes, but what is the father meant to teach a child about? The physical world. The father knows that red means stop, green means go, and orange means it's about to turn red. Because when we come into this world, we have no idea. But we do know a lot of other things. About the spiritual realm, babies are much more in touch, babies are much more in tune than others. So while on the physical plane, father is teacher and student, on the spiritual plane, student is teacher and father is student. And I don't get to extend that only to the relationship with my father. That's not very useful. Now I have to extend it to my children and say, I'm not here to teach them anything. I'm here to teach them fire is hot. I'm here to teach them, close the doors or whatever, right? Physical things, let's put on a car seat, stuff about this physical world that they may not know without me. Good. I'm here to teach them that. But about life, about our souls, I'm much dirtier than they are. I've been getting sullied in this planet for 39 years, and this guy's only been for 5 or 6 or some, just a couple of days old. I remember having this experience. I'm wow, I'm here to learn from my kids, not the other way around. And then some, if they're a pretty big gift, if I have a child who comes into the world who's meant to really wake me up, it's going to bring all sorts of things up inside me. It's right. The likelihood of me getting a child who's meant to radically transform my life in a positive way, and for me to just accept all of this child with open arms is very small. I'm going to have to work through a lot of my own stuff. That's how it becomes a gift. And I remember in there, I have one of my children has just I don't know for a better term for it, disproportionate joy. It comes out from nowhere for nothing, it seems like. And I got to tell you, it would trigger and irritate me. And in the journey, I'm thinking about this and saying wow, that's obviously some lesson for me. It wasn't okay, if we're having a birthday party and you're excited, or you just got a present and you're excited. It just felt like joy that would come from nowhere. And I would get irritated and angry by it. And I felt okay, there's some lesson about joy that I'm meant to learn in this world, that this child is showing up to teach me. And I'm not going to sit there and completely welcome that lesson with open arms. It's going to rub up great against so many of my own perspectives on the world that to the child may feel like disapproval and invalidation. And hopefully it doesn't take me too long. Hopefully I can get through it in a couple of days. But let's say I get stuck on one for 30, 40, 50 years. That doesn't say anything about the child. That says something about me. So as I'm going through this experience of being able to step into the role of student as a parent, I felt like, okay, any disapproval or any invalidation I was feeling from my father is not mine. It's not reflective of me. It's simply because I'm a gift to him that he hasn't been able to unpack yet.
Amazing.
And I think that all children get to look at this. I was able to shed a lot of the, not all of it, but shed a lot of the pain of the disapproval and invalidation, and say, okay, it's not because of my, it's not because of me being off, it's because of me being on.
Right.
All right. The more on I am, the more that may rub up against certain things. And then at the same point in time, I think that a lot of what I talk about, a lot of what I share, a lot of what I've come to brings goodness into my life. And I hope the same for his. And I also realized that I had to wrestle with a lot of the toxicity that I received in his house, in his home. So no doubt some of these things exist with him. So the fact that it rubs up against him and those things, that's something for me to put to the side. And hopefully I can keep being a shining and living example of the good parts of me and discard, right? You say, like discard the things that are not useful. And if I'm meant to deliver something positive and he's meant to receive it, then I prepare myself for that. And anytime I don't feel it, it's not about him, it's about me.
What a way to learn that. It's amazing when maturity is a soul growth. And then at that level, it's like, he might be my dad physically, right? But in the soul world, it doesn't mean that we're coming from the same college, right? For me, a big part of healing is, well, my mom hurt me and all the things she did, and it's like, maybe it's all she knew. That was the extent of her capacity of, based on her experiences and based on her soul power. And maybe I have a different gift, and it really helped me to kind of shift from victim to empowerment.
Right. Yeah, I think we got to be careful about that message, and that's why it's important that we have children as well. It's like, it's not making us better than or something else. It's just recognizing that the role, there's stuff about the physical world that we're meant to teach our children, and the stuff about the spiritual world that our children is meant to teach us. But my wife shared with me the other day that, when we first had our children, so we got married, within 9 or 10 months, we had our first child. 13 months later, another one. 15 months later, another one. So there was a whirlwind aspect to it at the beginning. We're dealing with setting up a new home, and you're living in that reality. All of a sudden, a child comes while the child is still, getting on a sleep schedule. Another one is in the oven, and by that, then another one again. Right? There was no time to really process and sit with any of this. It was just a whirlwind of process. And now we have several years, and obviously we're in very different places than we were last time, that now there's something about this experience that we have the opportunity to be more present to or more conscious of, At the same point in time, it hasn't fully registered. Like the magnitude of it hasn't fully registered. For me, I don't know if you've had this experience with your children, but it sometimes takes like a few months after they're born to recognize that that it's happening, that it happened. So am I fully there, like in my mind, that another child's coming to the world, and what that means? Not fully, but I will say that my life has changed dramatically in the last 6-7 months since my wife's pregnant. So, and a lot of it due to the pregnancy. So there's no question that a lot of the work of preparation is already being done. I'm living in whatever the child has in store for me. And I know it's got to be a big one because it's bigger than the first. Right? It's less. My first child taught me a lesson, and obviously it wasn't enough. I needed my second one to come. And then that wasn't enough. I needed a third one to teach more. And now that wasn't enough. I needed, right, this fourth one. So it's the biggest one to date. All of my life is coming together to this moment, for this lesson, for this growth, for this experience that I'm going to be getting from this child.
So
and hopefully for many, many decades.
Amen. How would you say your life changed so dramatically over the last 6-7 months? Do you put it into language?
Yeah, I mean, a lot about my relationship for sure, because, I shared in spurts on the podcast here and there that often when I'm working on something, I don't speak much about it. But an area that was confounding me greatly was my relationship. Especially as I started getting further and further into medicine, and then with that comes a certain reapproaching of Judaism, and my wife is on her own path with both of those things. So instead of it bring us closer, in some ways was bring us further apart. Like it was certainly highlighting areas of disagreement or differences in our relationship, and figuring out how to deal with that was not easy. It was really difficult. There's one healing that's our own. We're on our own path, on our own timetable, on our own journey. And then there's healing in relationship, which is just a completely different animal. It's not the same thing. And I guess what was tough about it was that I had known early on, I got the message on medicine that this is meant to make me a better father and a better husband. And for a while, it was making me a worse one. Certainly a worse husband.
How so?
There was more friction. We were further apart in our relationship. She was not feeling closer to me at a certain point in time. She's like, you're going to do another one? Like, may as well move to Australia. Like, I mean, there was times where we felt like we were
another medicine journey.
Another medicine journey. Yeah, there's times where we felt like we were planets and planets and planets apart.
Right.
And that, I guess, could have been fine if that was the only truth I was living with. And I see some people go in that direction and they feel like they've out-healed their loved ones. But I think in most cases, majority of cases, I want to speak about everyone, sometimes lives have to go a separate way. But in most cases, that idea of I've out-healed someone else is a very sick idea. And when I mean sick, I mean it's a very non-healthy idea that I've out-healed. And I wasn't able to embrace that idea fully, because very early on in medicine, it was clear, it was a commitment. It was like, this is going to make me a better father and better husband. It was almost the only way I could know that me exploring this terrain was safe. Like, we're going into different worlds. Like, how do we know where we're ending up with? We're opening ourselves up, these emotional, spiritual surgeries that we know some of us, we know we have to do. We just cannot live the way we have any longer. And we've tried a number of other things to get healing. And we see others who have what we want, and they're telling us these medicines have worked for them. So I knew I had to go there. But at the same point in time, the recognition that these are emotional surgeries, these are spiritual surgeries, and a lot can happen in those places. Let's not pretend everything is, rainbows and sunshine and only positive here. There's definitely things that can go wrong. So it was a very early commitment, almost a promise, an oath to myself that whatever work I do here is going to make me a better father and a better husband. Like, how could I? And that was something that I was tethered to, that this work had to make me a better father and a better husband. If it didn't, then the work was toxic. I just knew it. But at the same point in time, it was driving my wife and I further and further and further away. Or further and further and further apart. And then through the pregnancy, like early on when she became pregnant, I was like, okay, things may shift and get better, but it was something else that did it. It wasn't true to the relationship, because in pregnancy, always everything slows down. It's a different person in front of us. My wife, I also knew her specifically. She has very difficult pregnancy. She's often bedridden for a couple of months, which in this case she was. So obviously all of the things that we were dealing with, we wouldn't be dealing with now. And then I wondered, okay, did I have that impact on her? Did the pregnancy have that impact on her? And obviously realizing that that's an ego-driven idea. I don't have to have impact on anyone. It's right. Change is happening for a person, and if it happens through me or through someone else, no difference. So some was relaxing that idea of, okay, if there's something changing that's getting us on the same page, and that's a pregnancy, that's fine. It doesn't have to come through a conversation, a therapy session, a medicine journey, or whatever my ideas of the way it was supposed to happen. And then the other is just over time recognizing that, I'm not on my train, I'm on God's train, I'm on some other forces train, and this is the journey exactly the way it's meant to be. And over the course of the last 6-7 months, a lot of the differences between my wife and I have, we're in the same planet now.
Right.
Like, I'm not saying it's completely done, but it definitely feels like it's moving things in a very, very quickly in the right direction, in a very, very positive, way. So hopefully that answers your question of A, why I was apprehensive about the pregnancy to begin with, and number two, some of what's changed as a result of the pregnancy. That's one aspect. There are others as well. I don't know if it's a complete mistake that the shul, for example, and our family moving full-time next to the house of more, which became the shul, which for a while, for the last several years, was part-time here. I was only part-time living next to the house of more, but now it's full-time, and Rabbi Avi Wolf and his wife Leah coming out to be in this community, and that shul, or whatever it is, this community building in this way. I definitely feel like it's connected to the pregnancy in some way. I couldn't see it happening. I can't see it completely happening without the pregnancy. Certainly not with the peace. It happened in a very, very peaceful way, this transition, this change, where it could have happened with a lot of tension and discomfort otherwise, or not happened at all.
Do you feel that your language, your way of communicating, your ability to express yourself has improved in this period of time? Like, you did these journeys, you had these surgeries, you had all these, and now you've been able to integrate and implement that into your relationship.
Yes, certainly. I think that, especially when we're talking about communicating in a way that could be received, like there are certain ingredients that are so toxic to that. Like, if I want to speak in a way that another person can receive it, I have to be able to eliminate anger. I have to be able to eliminate judgment. I have to be able to eliminate bitterness, resentments. Like, all of that has to be stripped from the system. And I felt like my life, like the relationship part of my life, slowing down significantly over the course of the pregnancy has allowed for a lot of that to get removed from the system. My wife being in bed for a few months was like, there was no one to argue with. I was left to argue with myself. There was no one to be angry at or bitter. She's just lying in bed 23 out of 24 hours a day. She can barely think, barely talk. So I could put the full mirror on me. Like, any angerness that's left is at me. Any bitterness is my own. Any resentment is my own. Any judgment is my own. Like, any of that stuff just has to be removed from the system entirely. And I think that's, if you talk about medicine as light, right? Not medicine as light, but some of the messages we'll get as light. We have to not allow it to shatter our own system.
Right.
And sometimes some of the messages can come to us in a way that we need it delivered. Right? We need to hear this message in a way that's that's harsh. And so often men need to hear things in a little bit of a more forceful way to wake us up than women. So like men, the way we speak to each other, sometimes we can, like, you can talk to me in ways that will improve our friendship. Where you're like, Ellie, you triggered me, right?
Right.
Will improve our friendship. Where women will often talk in much softer ways, right? That will help their friendship. So sometimes getting ideas in a certain way that will work for me. The masculine feminine dynamic is not the only one I play, but just as an example, where it will work for me, there's a certain message, a certain importance, a certain delivery, like, hey, Ellie, this has to change in your life. And then me going home and delivering it with that same force is a sign that I haven't, my vessel hasn't caught up to this light. It's not holding the light.
Right.
I'm purging it onto someone else. I'm spewing it onto someone else versus being able to hold this idea with all of it. The urgency that I may be feeling from it is a sign of the old, like the weakness of my vessel, not the
Wow.
problems on the outside. And then once I can get to that place that that's not felt anymore, now I can deliver and say, I'll give an example of this. So I got a message, it was on a breathwork actually, where I saw what living in two homes, so I was living during the weekday in one home and the weekend in another home, what that was doing to me energetically. It was completely splitting me.
Yeah.
I had no home. There was no place that I was grounded in. And I suddenly became conscious of the fact that this arrangement that I had brought my family into was unsustainable for me. Which is, hey, we live here during the week and here on the weekend. And no doubt it had impact for others as well, my wife, my kids, but I was experiencing it for myself of how I'm split and how it's creating stress in my life and how it's creating discord. And it's just, I'm not in a sustainable place. It worked for a period of time, but once I have that truth and I see the way I'm fragmented inside as a result of this arrangement, then the instinct is to like run home, tell your wife and kids, pack up, we're moving to one house, right? Like that's it. You know, I've become aware of the negative impact this is having on me and my family. But if I run in and deliver that, that means I haven't really sat with and absorbed the fullness of this message. So fortunately with that one, I got an additional messages around it. And in a unique coincidence, I got I got a letter from the Rebbe someone shared with me at the same time, which was about men communicating with women and whatever, just a neat little letter. And it definitely softened me to say, okay, I got this message, right? I'm changed from it. I got it in a harsh way. I saw the way these choices were impacting me. But if I can't contain it, then I just go like a bull in a china shop through my house and upend their world. That's not healthy. That's not compassionate. That's not loving. That's not good. So I got I got true light, right? True clarity on the impact this arrangement was having on me. But now I got to sit there, and it may take 6 months. It may take a year. It may take a long time to be able to come back home and deliver this message. Fortunately, in my case, within a short time of finding that out, we found out my wife is pregnant. I didn't say anything to her about this message. And as she was pregnant, she wanted to stay in one home more than the other, but not as a permanent arrangement, just, okay, let's stay in this home closer to the house of more. And then over time, as we chatted more and more, she actually brought it up with me. And then I was able to share, but I don't even think I shared it as a medicine journey. If she hears this podcast, maybe the first time she hears the fullness of this message, but at this point, it was delivered, right? So I think that happens to many people in medicine sometimes. They get a message and they want to run home and change the world versus no, sit with the intensity of that light. Sit with it, have a vessel that can contain it. And then maybe when you're communicating to the next person, you're communicating it both with the vessel, right? Or the instructions on, okay, like I have this light and here's a vessel that can actually support it as well. And by the time it was delivered, it was a very, very peaceful conversation. Hopefully that answers your question.
That was awesome. That was so awesome. So that leads me to the obvious next question for me. You've shared that earlier in your relationship, your intimacy from your end of the spectrum was scattered, or you weren't fully present. You mentioned that your wife didn't want to say it to you because she didn't want to trigger your addiction. Being able to hold all this energy, is this the moment where the inflection point where you could stand fully in the intimacy and be fully present and bring that to the
relationship? Did you just try to find a creative way to ask how my sex life is?
Sure.
What?
Sure.
Let me see.
If that's allowed.
What?
If that's allowed,
yeah, let me pass on
that one.
Yeah, I think there are possibly parts of the conversation I can answer and parts of the conversation that are rightfully more private. But what I would answer is like this. What I would answer, I guess, is that based on my experiences in marriage, real experiences, not thoughts, but real experiences in marriage, I've concluded that the best of sex, right? And in many ways in my addiction, I was searching for the best sexual experience I can find, right? That was part of the
best hit.
Part of the search. What is the best hit? Many people say with addiction, we're chasing the feeling from the first hit, but in some way we're trying to recreate some amazing magical experience. So I would say, as someone who has endeavored to find the best sexual experience I could have, I firmly believe, based on my life experiences, that exists in the context of deep intimacy in a relationship, in a monogamous relationship, that is where the magic of sexuality exists, and the best pleasure and the highest states of physical benefits of sex exist in that domain, in that arena, from actual experiences. I hope that answers the question without...
Right. But I'm just getting to that point. You don't just sign up to marriage and all of a sudden you're having a better experience than you've ever had before. Like,
100% not. No.
What?
No, 100% not.
Right. So there's a process to that, and in that process, you have a ton of shadow that comes up because all of a sudden, coming from you kind of live. This is my read on you. And you correct me if I'm wrong. You leaked all over the place with the sexuality.
Yeah.
Then you turn to a sexual ascetic lifestyle with sex anonymous, etc., to prepare yourself, to clean yourself for the marriage, and then you're re-engaging sexuality, which is a very animalistic experience.
Could be, doesn't have to be.
Well, I mean, it's part of it.
Okay. I mean, there's a physical quality to it. Yeah.
A lot of physicality to it. And once you re-enter just stopping having sex for many years, I don't know if that's what you did, but if you, and then re-entering it is going to bring back a lot of the old programming that was associated to that physical experience.
Okay. Yeah. So I've spoken about this, and I'm glad you're asking it, because obviously something I said was misunderstood. So my wife and I met 5 years before we got married. And a year into the relationship, I recognized that I needed to do something. And I began 12 steps of sexual addiction recovery. 4 years later, we got married. It took me a few years to get my feet like kind of firmly planted on the ground as it relates to recovery, right? I had relapses, back and forth. I left recovery. I came back to recovery. All of the drama that could and does happen for many people as they're embarking on this path. No one wants to completely change their life if they don't have to. So even though I made a decision in 2013 that I needed recovery, I needed to be really convinced of that decision over the next few years. And sure enough, by the time I entered my marriage, I was in a place where I felt solid about my ability to maintain sobriety. And during that time, I had 3 children, right? So obviously, or at least two of my children. So when I say it was ascetic, what I mean is that I was living in a way that I was afraid of
Right.
sex. And I saw sex as almost strictly for reproductive purposes and not much for
Connection. Connection.
Intimacy, connection, pleasure, all of that. Whatever, all of that exists in the context of a relationship. In many ways, I was still afraid of my sex drive.
Right.
So while I was sober, quote unquote, I wasn't healthy sexually at all. I was healthier than I was. I wasn't spritzing all over the place. I wasn't running around with multiple people. I was able to, come home at the end of every single day and look at my wife in the eye and say, I was faithful today. In those ways, I felt good, but it certainly wasn't where I needed, where I wanted to be, or any of us should want to be. As I got into medicine, I was able to have some clarity around this. And it relaxed some of the fears that I was approaching. First of all, it made me aware of the fears. I didn't realize that I was so afraid of my sexuality. It made me aware of how afraid I was. My wife shared with me later that she understood this, but didn't know how to bring it up with me in a way that I could hear, which I probably couldn't. I probably needed the medicine to. I think she made the right call, right? She had the vessel to contain that idea. So she held that idea, didn't share it with me, but eventually confirmed it for me that I wasn't showing up sexually in a way that was meeting either of our standards. When one of the messages that I got from the medicine was that sexuality and intimacy go hand in hand and are designed to go hand in hand. Sexuality and intimacy. And because of ruptures in one or the other, we often seek intimacy without sexuality and seek sexuality without intimacy. Right. And many of us have been on that path where we're most comfortable being sexual with someone where there is no intimacy.
Right.
And when intimacy comes, and when there's intimacy felt, we run away from sexuality. And in me, I had that very much to an extreme, very, very much to an extreme, and made me aware of that. And it said, just trust. Just trust. The message from the medicine was just trust. That as you get healthier and healthier sexually, it's going to want to re-intertwine itself with intimacy. Don't be afraid of this. Your sexual drive is not a negative one. It's not one that you have to run away from. It's not one that you have to suppress. It's one that if nurtured and cared for in a healthy way, and you bring yourself back to the natural, healthy intimacy, that healthy sexuality that you were endowed with, then it will want to express itself through intimacy. Don't be afraid that if you feel the fullness of your sexual drive, you're going to run outside of your marriage. Quite the opposite. If you feel the fullness of your sexual drive, you'll want to express that within the context of intimacy, within the context of true intimacy. And when you're feeling that true intimacy, you'll want to express the sexuality. They become almost two strands of the same rope. And during the course of those messages, that integration, things I'm still integrating about it, my sex life improved as well.
Right, because that's really the crux of my question. Because as you are going down that route, you still need to clear the old sexual associations. Because just stopping it is not clearing. Stopping it, re-entering into a passionate space that's absorbed with intimacy without any of the old programming is, to me, it's the goal.
Yes.
And I'm extremely curious, and this might be pushing the envelope. I'm just curious about the steps of this is coming up from the past. I'm like, the intimacy is scaring the heck out of me. Having an easier way of spilling out my energy is right, and then being able to course correct, and it's a lot of deaths and rebirths. I feel, and I think that as you get to this point, so you're saying that in the medicine it said trust the process. was it a linear path? Or,
Trust your sexuality. No, not a
was
linear
it two
path at
steps
all.
forward, one step back kind of deal?
No, nothing's a linear path. That's not the way any growth
Right.
happens. But it's, you go too far to the right and too far to the left, too far to the right, too far to the left. And a lot of things we spoke about where I went too far to withholding my expression, and then I went too far with expression, and then, back and forth. And we learn through overcorrecting that, and eventually we calibrate and find, I guess, what some people call balance. The message was not to be afraid of my sexuality. Like, it wants to be intertwined deeply with intimacy. So don't be afraid of feeling it. Don't be afraid of leaning into it. Don't be afraid of understanding it. Don't be afraid of knowing it, which I didn't realize until that time that I was afraid of. And a lot of the reason I was afraid was because of the messages of recovery, right? Once an addict, always an addict, right? Some of these ideas, while very helpful at one stage, are toxic at another stage.
Right.
And I think that's where, as we begin, when we first start learning a subject, we think we're experts on it.
Right.
And then as we go deeper and deeper and deeper into it, we understand like how little we understand about it. Every single subject. Everything has an infinite quality to it. And I think that anyone speaking with healing or this, myself included, right, we are speaking with a certain level of authority on the subject. You are showing up today as being on this path and sharing certain ideas, right, around your life, things that have bettered your life. Is that we don't forget who we are and we're in the process. It's like, yes, this is based on where I stand today. Like, this is the most truth I can share about the subject. And if I was where you were, knowing everything I know now, this is exactly what I would share. But I recognize that my mind completely blown open next month or in 2 months from now, so keep coming back.
Well, I really appreciate that, because in my process, it's like, as I clean up my vessel, I see the old programming rearing its head as I try to re-engage. And so it's like, a lot of my relationship with you is that it's more than the words. You actually, you're gifting me an energy that then, like, it takes time, and then I'm like, oh, that's what that guy was talking about. So I appreciate that, because that, like, I also feel, I feel the effort of getting to the point where you can keep both energies of sexuality and intimacy and hold that space. So it gives me a level of hope, and more than hope, more like attainability.
So this actually connects to one of the earlier questions you asked me about saying if I was the author of my own story, I would put those chapters in, and that could not be compassionate. In some cases, what I think is important to do is, based on the road that I've walked on this path, right? This is the farthest point I've seen.
Right.
And share that with someone, not from judgment or compassion, but if I'm telling someone, or if I'm talking to someone about sexuality, it's let's not make the mistake of believing, even someone's embarking on the path today, let's not make the mistake of thinking that just because you're sober for 5 years, that you can tell everyone else, I'm healthy sexually, this is what to do. Because I stumbled on that. Like, I've been there before, and I've held on too tightly to that idea. And while it helped me stay sober, it also hurt me in my in my own creative relationship, and my own relationship with myself, my own happiness, my own drive, my sex life, all of those things. So planting that idea for someone today, I think, could be very valuable. You're starting your path with sexuality. Today, your goal is just to figure out how to turn this thing off so it doesn't overwhelm you. But once you've figured out how to not continuously obsess around sex, it doesn't mean you're done.
Right.
Just because you haven't watched porn in 3 years doesn't mean we should stand up there and talk to the whole world around healthy sexuality, that this is what it is and this is what we must do and everything else. You've learned something. You're obviously better than you were a little bit ago, but speak with humility. Speak with humility. There's more. There's more. Someone who's in a sexual relationship with that person is not going to be satisfied. And that's not a good thing.
And to link back what we were talking about before about this mythical society, and it's the big vart here is that the great reverence we have for sex, and that's the power that maybe the continuance of the Jewish people is that it wasn't that we kidnapped sex, so it's more that we're able to access it on a higher level, on the highest of levels, that we're most tapped into the life force, into the creative power, into these energies, and that's what strengthens throughout times, and that to me is an inspirational aspiration.
Yeah, part of the reverence for it is its unattainability.
Right.
That we can never quite get it. We're always going to be a little to the right or a little to the left on this.
Yeah.
And we're just trying to make those movements, like we're trying to be off by, a few feet, not a few miles, so to speak. But there's recognizing that we're dealing with something so powerful, so like our highest power, and presuming or assuming that the average person can get this perfect is not it. And I think that that itself relaxes so much of the shameful messages that we've received that were so toxic to us. But then we see the other side of that, right? It's like, oh, we don't want the shameful messages. So then what? Sexual promiscuity.
Right.
It may feel good in the moment, but we don't want it for our children.
Yeah, and you have attuned me to that, to like how in Judaism we're aiming for something incredible and impressive, and it's not that we're the oral element of it, the transmission element of it was we have something beautiful in our hands and let's figure it out, as opposed to like stay away from it because it's dangerous.
What, sexuality or the Torah? Which one?
Sexuality was where like you once mentioned to me is that it's like you go for the bullseye, like Torah. It's giving you like something you can't. It's unattainable, like you said that now, but it's because it's taking us somewhere. We're hitting our highest capacity, our highest potential through sex. Sex is a gift. Sex is it's something that it's life force. It's larger than life. It's something that we always can reach a higher level. And that gives so much energy to rules.
Right. You're saying like halacha, for example.
Halacha.
I was thinking about the same thing. Okay.
Yeah, that's I got that from you, and I was like, yeah, this guy's got a point.
Yeah, it's interesting that you use the word rules. So there's a gentleman, Nissim Forma, who I've interviewed. He uses something called the tapas acupressure technique, and I think I'll have him on the podcast again pretty soon because he's doing an event at the House of More. And a few times I felt like reaching out to him for a session. I did one session with him immediately before the podcast, and he helped me like with something I was really stuck on and struggling with. And a few times since then, I've had calls with him and been able to process through things. Anyway, I was learning with someone once. I learned with him occasionally, and like whenever he brought up the word halacha, there was like a trigger, like this visceral trigger inside me, and I felt it. And I said, I gotta, like, why do I get so triggered by this word halacha? I'd be sometimes like learning Rebbe Sichos, and like there he dropped something halacha. I'm like, I'm gonna slam this down. Like, why do you always have to go there? And I just noticed that was a real reaction. So I reached out to him for a session. I don't know why I thought that specifically would be helpful, because I use many different techniques. I have many different ones at my disposal, but for this one, I felt like reaching out to him. So I did, and we did a session on my triggers around halacha. I don't remember everything that came up, but I know where I landed at the end. So one of the mistakes I feel I was making, which was very unhelpful for me, is that I was hearing halacha as a law, almost all or nothing. You broke it or you kept it. Right. You violated the law. If you didn't do this, you violated the law. Right. And what I came with at the end was more like halacha as a way.
That's like, what it means.
Well, yeah. Like I'm going to describe for you the perfect, like our way in every single capacity of life. So as an example, there are many people who consider themselves Shomer Shabbos who aren't 100% when it comes to the laws around how we speak on Shabbos, right? Then we're not supposed to speak business, and we're not supposed to speak words that are not specifically for Shabbos itself, right? Shabbos, the day we're meant to be incredibly intentional with our words. And there are many laws around it, right? We're not allowed to talk about business, or we're not allowed to talk about matters that are weekday matters. We're not allowed to plan for after Shabbos and all of these other things, right? You're familiar with it? And even using the language of not allowed, not allowed. Okay, so for me, like afterwards, I was able to say, okay, there's this concept of Shabbos. You want to do it perfectly? I'll tell you everything there is to know about it. Think this and speak this and don't speak that and do this and everything else. But at the same point, like doing that, first of all, like keeping it all in mind is impossible. Half the rabbis you go to ask about Shabbos, they have to go look it up.
Right.
Right, which I do in that sense. It's like they have it at their fingertips. There's books and books and books and opinions and different variations, and then there's new technologies coming online, right? It's an evolving process. Shabbos today is different than Shabbos was in 1920. Just we live in different times. We're using different. Can I open a cereal box? Can I not open a cereal box? What if the digitally printed picture? Whatever. Okay. There's like, you can go in many different directions. They're packaging things in different ways than they were before. The way we're walking, the kind of shoes, we're walking down the street, you're passing sensors. What should you do? How many sensors are we passing when we're walking down the street? How many cameras are turning on from it? I don't know, right? There are many questions that we can debate that weren't questions previously. So I relaxed after this. Okay, this is not like an all or nothing. This is not an all or nothing, which is like either I do or I violated the law. Where many people, the way they preach religion basically comes to, so I don't know who said this. It was like sounds like a George Carlin line, but something to the effect of, anyone who does more than me is a fanatic, and anyone who does less than me is a heretic. It's like, that's the way we practice religion. So someone will talk and they'll hear me saying these things. It's, oh, you're a heretic practically, because I'm suggesting something that's less than you. But I assure you that if you look at the laws, if you go read every single one, there are some that you consider baseline. And in that same volume of books, just a couple chapters later, it has something else that you consider fanatic. So these are not like laws. You do it, you violate, you're prescribed to death. That's not what it's talking about. Even when it talks about Shabbos being prescribed to death, it's not talking about someone who made a mistake on Shabbos. It's not talking about even someone who didn't keep Shabbos. It's talking about someone who brazenly desecrated Shabbos. It's talking about someone who took the whole concept and turned it upside down. Like similar to the idea of sexuality. We're not talking about someone who's has an uncontrollable sex drive, goes to the other city, right, dresses in black and sleeps with someone. We're talking about people who celebrate, right? They celebrate the desecration of sexuality. That's the problem we're talking about. We're not talking about someone's individual life and the choices they make, which are fully dependent on their circumstance and their circumstance that they live in, and then their internal drives and everything else going on inside them, which who are we to judge and pass judgment on? So once I was able to relax that and say, okay, so here's these books. You want to understand the way of Judaism. You want to understand the way it was understood at different points in time. You want to know the way it's been reinterpreted at different points in time. So here it is. And there are many different teachers with many different approaches. And, you can choose the Rambam and you can choose the Rush and you can choose the Beis Yosef. Right? There are many different ways of arriving at. But Asher, this is the way. This is the way. This is a prescription to be that person. But you're also not going to get it 100%. Which is another point that I kept coming across in letters of the Rebbe at different, probably 4 or 5 different letters that I had read or received over the course of about a year, which had the same expression, Mailim HaKadosh, right? Is that in matters of holiness, we're constantly improving, which that means 2 things, which means that yesterday I wasn't as good as today, and today I'm not going to be as good as tomorrow, right? So this idea of like a frum Jew in some way, if it means that I am where I am okay,
right.
and I don't need to grow anymore, and you're not, you need to grow, so then we've missed the whole plot. Because in matters of holiness, Mylin, we're supposed to be moving up constantly, and wherever we were, hopefully we aren't anymore, and wherever we're going to be, we're not right now. So what am I going to say? Because I'm not where I plan to be in a year, I'm a terrible person now? That doesn't make any sense. So we're just, all of us are supposed to be continuously progressing with holiness. And then I can look now at halacha, and I can look now at this way and say, okay, so this is the description, and how much am I ready for at this moment, and do my best to be honest with myself. And then if I can look back at any point in time and say, this is more than it was, then as far as I'm concerned, I'm headed in a good direction. And if someone else is going to tell me, even if they're doing more than me today, that I'm good and I've been good for a long period of time, and if I do the same thing, I'll still be good, then we're practicing a different religion.
Right. And just to add on things that I'm just reflecting things that you've told me also, is once we go up higher, not to think that we need to be perfect, right? Like, so I start to do a little bit of Shabbos, all of a sudden I feel the guilt comes in, like, well, I'm not keeping all of Shabbos. And like the avoda is to ascend gradually. It's an ascension process. And just because you've done some level of ascending doesn't mean that you've made it. And
it doesn't mean you have to.
Right, exactly. Thank you. That's
yes,
exactly. And that's like, that's a big one, because that's a big voice. That's
yes, and that's right. That's one of the things that certainly happens, especially as people start doing medicine or spiritual experiences, start coming closer to Jewish practice, is they want to in some way take off, like pick back up where they left off, in some way. And I don't know that that's helpful, right? When I think about the feeling that voice will give you, I think it's going to send you further away from Shabbos, not closer.
Exactly.
Right? It's not something that brings someone in. It's something that pushes someone away. Versus, like, this Shabbos, you did more than last Shabbos, right? In any way.
Right.
In any way. For a mentor of mine who once taught me this, I didn't even realize she was teaching it to me. It just like, every time she would suddenly say, hey, are you ready to take on more about Shabbat? Take on more of Shabbos. Like, oh, Shabbos is too much. So, but maybe a little bit. It's like what? So take a shower before Shabbos. I was like, what, that means something? Like, that's meaningful towards Shabbos? And I understand what she was teaching me, but over time, in many different things, the recognition that me taking something on for Shabbos, taking something on for kosher, even though it's not all the way kosher, right, is meaningful on its way of kosher.
Yeah, it just makes me think about Hanukkah. Like, the first night we do one light, the last we did 8 candles. Does that mean that when we just did one night, it meant nothing? In a way, you know what I mean? Like, it has nothing to do with what you're doing. It's how you do it. It's like it's your process.
Right. And the scarier, like, when you connect to the healing path and the healing journey, where it can get so twisted is when someone who seems to be further along then calls back a toxic message, right? And throws guilt on us, or shame, or judgment, or bitterness, or any of those things.
Right.
Is, hey, how come you're not lighting 6 candles, right? Or how come you just decided? And by the way, these are thoughts, I should say, that come up in my own head. I'm not talking about anyone else. They come up in my own head, where suddenly I decide I'm more careful with Shabbos, or a little bit more careful with kosher. It was a short time ago. I don't know how many years ago. Maybe 2 years ago, I decided to stop drinking non-kosher wine.
Wow.
My wife hasn't taken that on. And now with pregnancy, she's not anyway. And she said, are you upset at me for drinking non-kosher? Like, are you upset at me for drinking non-kosher wine? I said, who am I to judge your process? Like, just because I took this on 2 years ago, so suddenly anyone who doesn't do this specific thing in this moment, and what about all the things I'm not doing? But the voice is still there, right? The voice is still there. When we're sitting at dinner and she's bringing a kosher bottle of wine for me, right? Because as I'm saying this, right, we still don't eat only in kosher restaurants. And I don't know if that will come about. So I'm saying, like, this has been a journey with us around kosher. And today we'll go to a restaurant, she'll order a non-kosher wine. And if I'm drinking wine, it's because we brought a kosher bottle from home. And imagine this craziness, Right? Imagine the craziness. Someone looking at this will think like this is the epitome of stupidity, right? You have two people sitting in a non-kosher restaurant. One decides to need non-kosher wine, and he can think a judgmental thought about the other person. But it's true. It's true. Meaning I have to consciously work not to. I have to work that out of my system. So you don't think someone else further along the way, on any level of Shabbos, who has gotten to such appreciation of Shabbos, thinks it's as crazy that one person can be talking about business and making plans for the week and doing who knows what, getting slammed pissed drunk on Shabbos, but they don't carry, they don't drive, they don't work, they don't use technology, they don't use any other things, but will pass judgment at someone who drove to shul. It'll look the same to them as two people sitting at a non-kosher restaurant and one person passing judgment on on drinking kosher or non-kosher wine when the meal itself is, questionable or not kosher. I think you get the idea. Is that
it just seems like the work of not passing judgment and being able to not appreciate your wife at that level without getting into that voice is almost more important than actually drinking the kosher wine. Or equally, it's in the same.
It's a different practice.
Yeah.
Right? It's a different practice, but certainly it's a different practice. But in some ways, as it relates to us as a human being, I think we've developed further when we're able to sit with someone without judgment just because we've decided recently to take on a little more than the fact that we can not drink something.
And to me, though, it's in the peyote, that in the journey, the big takeaway for me was, can I stand in my fire and be the giver? Meaning, I realized in Hebrew and davening this week, it was zachar and zecher is the same word, where to remember and being a male, it's the same word. Can I constantly be remembering that my job is to be providing that container? My job is to be providing the acceptance. My job is to be creating the safety for my partner, for my kids. Should be soon, Bezat Hashem. For my employees, for all my space, without needing to take.
Yes.
Right? Because that's something that I wasn't.
Right. And you're right. When there is judgment, when there is resentment, when there is victimhood, any of those feelings are a form of taking from the other person. Right. It's like I'm feeling a little better about myself by
this is the final question that it segues well. One of the things I appreciate about you, and this is my assumption, you correct me if I'm wrong, you're not out there thinking, how am I going to change the world and how am I going to, you kind of live more from a space of what's alive in me, and I'm going to and I'll be true to myself and true to my soul and what comes of it. It's like when it comes to the word vision, I don't see you as a person who's like, oh, I wake up in the morning, I have a vision, I decided I'm going to go and I'm going to change the whole universe. However, you still have you have a tremendous amount of gift. So what's alive in you as far as where your impact? Like, do you have any, is there any clarity in that way, or is it one day at a time?
Let me say something that's a little bit unfinished about the last point, and then I'll answer this question. So in regards to the last point, we went on some topics about kosher, non-kosher, and a certain level of acceptance around these things. So a short time ago, I had a Chabad rabbi speak to me. He listens to the podcast, and he says, he listened to one, I'm thinking, it's the one with Avi Wolf. We did the second one we did together, did a long one. And towards the end, I went to certain ideas around, similar to what we're sharing here, right? Around acceptance of someone else not being at the same exact place. I shared some examples of being more accepting of my wife's path with religiousness versus my own, etc. And he brought that up, and, I said, well, were some of the ideas sacrilegious? So he's a little bit. So I said, I hear you. Listen, I hear you. I'm open to being wrong on something. I'm not, we call the podcast In Search of More, not the enlightened man, not anything else. I'm in search of a topic. If new information comes that's contrary, then I'm open to hearing. But I thought about it afterwards. and saying, okay, so what was his problem with? We went into a different topic afterwards, and we didn't stay long on that topic. I saw it wasn't comfortable. It wasn't very comfortable for him to sit there. He made his point. But I thought about it afterwards, and I was thinking, okay, so here you have a guy who heard me talk about gradual steps in the direction of Judaism, right? That is an acceptable path. That's all I said. I didn't put down Judaism. I didn't say it's not a good way. Quite the opposite, right? I spoke about it very positively. I spoke about it as ways that are good for ourselves, good for our soul, good for the world, all of those things. But I just recognized gradual steps in the process as being something that's worthy of recognition versus the opposite, and not putting too much too fast on someone. And he came in to me telling me how this was not okay in some way, right? They're a little sacrilegious. And I was thinking, but like, who is he? What message is he carrying? And he's forced to almost carry two different messages. Because when he's running his Chabad house,
Right.
he's totally giving that message to people.
Right.
Come to Shon Shabbos, you have to drive, it's not my business. Aliyah for the Torah, that's okay. It's not important what you did in your bedroom or what you did in, or what you ate this week. Like, just do one more mitzvah. One more mitzvah is good. And if it's too much, they'll always take their foot off the pedal. They'll always take their foot off the pedal because that's the way they think they learned. But then they sit in front of someone who grew up this way and they think it's not a truth anymore. And they think it's sacrilegious. And I think like that kind of cognitive dissonance, I just hope that the eagle who comes to wake them up
Right.
does it gently. Okay.
I want to add more to the question because it really goes well with it, because I find that halacha also could have a spin of vision to it, meaning in the impact that you're making, do you find that you want to add an element of bringing a digestible, metabolizable, or integrative way of halacha into the work that you do, and is that part of the idea of the path that you're on? So it's kind of a two-part
Right.
question.
So no, far from that. This is not like a more palatable way of delivering halachic Judaism. That's not the idea of this, because it's not my path currently, not at all. I think in many ways the podcast itself, as that relates, is a format for me to process, speak to people in ways that process ideas and speak to people in ways that are difficult to experience in real life, right? The likelihood that we'd have a several-hour uninterrupted conversation with this much presence is unlikely without this podcast, right?
Sure.
If this is not recording, right, which is totally possible, there's no one sitting there watching it. If this is failed and corrupted, if the video recording, I will not consider this a waste of time.
Right.
Right. This itself was a very useful, productive conversation for me. So a lot of ways just to process where I'm at and share from that space. Overall, so I just want to take that off the table. It's not at all one of the things that happens, which I think is misunderstood, when someone's coming back in some way, which I am, and in some ways you are, right? We're returning back to Judaism in some fashion. But the reason we're doing it is because it's working for us in some way. There's something that's lighting up inside us that we're moving towards, and we find it fulfilling, and we find it meaningful, and we find it positive, and more along the path of our journey. Is that others can make the mistake of thinking that, oh, look, they're coming back. But it's not completely true.
Right.
It's not completely true, because when you talk about like Avodas HaBarurim, right, like that concept, and something like we're sifting through what works and doesn't work. An immature way of dealing with something, I would say immature, a less mature way, I don't want to use judgment word, but a less mature way of dealing with something is that if overall it doesn't work, we push it away completely. So when someone does that, then like to feel rejection on the other end of that doesn't, like, why should you feel rejection? The person rejected the whole idea, but how do I know what they rejected and what they didn't reject?
Right.
Right? It's not specific. now when someone deals with it in a more mature fashion, we're saying, okay, I'm going to take this, but I'm not going to take that. This aspect feels very resonant with me and feels like a very helpful idea that I want to integrate into my life and I want to teach my children. But this other idea is toxic to me. I'm rejecting it. That rejection should be felt much more forcefully by others. So someone watching this, if they're making the mistake of thinking that, oh, okay, we're returning in some way, don't feel that. That's not the message we're trying to give. There are certain ideas that we're rejecting much more forcefully than we ever have and much more specifically. And pay attention to those things, not that we're doing and saying, oh, look, there they go and keep Shabbos again, there they go and keep kosher again. No, but look at the way we talk about sexuality. Look at the way we talk about halacha. Look at the way we talk about judgment. And look at the way we talk about guilt and shame. And those things, we're rejecting certain aspects so forcefully, I'm not coming back. This is not a returning to. This is, I'm deciding that my life was intentional by God. I'm not pretending that the way, like somehow I managed to be born into the perfect system. Judaism and Rebbe and Chabad and the century. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that there was something perfect about it for me. Right? God created me in this world to go through certain experiences. And as it happens in my experiences, I was inundated with a tremendous amount of sichas and tanya and, and all of these other things. So I could say has nothing to do with me. And in my healing journey, it's disconnected. Or I could say, no, it's very, very meaningful to my journey and path, independent of absolute truth or absolute lies. I'm saying this is very meaningful. It's intentional. God thrust me into a system where I was raised 2.5 blocks away from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And I went through certain experience in life, and he was the most prominent figure in our community. And I lived in that reality for 20 years. So am I going to put such intention around certain aspects of my life and not that? Or is there something about this man that I'm meant to learn from and understand and, reapproach? So I think that's where a lot of this comes from versus some full spectrum of truth and me arriving at this. If someone else grew up in Israel and, in a certain society, in a different sect or a different group, or someone else was a different religion, then by all means, right? Re-embrace and reconnect to that. I think it's a helpful part of someone's journey to be able to go back and say, hey, this was very intentional that I was put into that. It's really finding the meaning and the purpose and the juice in their story versus just taking whole 20, 30, 40 years of our life and saying like irrelevant for where I'm going. It's a very specific process is what I'm saying.
Right.
It's far from me to say this is the path for everyone. While at the same time, I will share certain ideas that I think collectively as a society, if we have sexual promiscuity, right, like something like that, I think it's bad for society. I think it's bad for children. I think too much pornography, or maybe any pornography is bad for us. Like I can share certain ideas from that perspective, but that's much more broad than, hey, like this is the lifestyle and like, let me bring this back to you. I'm certainly not there.
So are you saying that your bottom line is you're sharing your truths, however that takes you, there's no agenda, there's no real master plan. You're here, you're doing what feels right, you're putting your hat on the line, and what will be will be. The search is on.
Yeah, like in terms of a vision, like some master plan, even for the house of more, things like that. I never imagined this way because I don't see it as my vision. I think Mayor Collinson shared this with me a while ago. I think it was a journey he had where he was walking through a cave, and every 5 or 10 feet that he walked, it illuminated the next part. We get to see a little bit and then we go further on. So we're on a path, and for those that think this is similar to someone else's path, someone told me, like, oh yeah, they always come back home, whatever. Okay, so like if you think my path is similar or your path is similar to like someone else's, then that's a very sacrilegious idea. You're unique, I'm unique. We're all on very, very unique paths specific to us and specific to our life, and only we can do it and only we have it. And the same same with you, and the same with everyone else. And I'm doing what feels the most true to me at the moment. There's no master plan. I don't know where this goes 2 years from now, and I don't have I try not to have a strong opinion about that.
I love that. I think that's it's very empowering, and it really brings back our conversation from the beginning, because the less of attachment we have to our story, the more magic. And there's almost this like opposite. It's the less I think, the more I can absorb. You know,
Right. Yeah, 100%.
you know, it's what can run through me. I think it's also bring it down. It's the fundamental of Chabad is B'tul Hayesh, is being able to live in a space of humility, so I can access something much greater than myself.
Right. And not humility to be confused with humiliation, because quite the opposite. We can start feeling quite good about ourselves and quite important I feel like we have quite an important place in the world, in our world, and we're certainly very, very important to certain people. There's no room for humility in the relationship with our children. Right. We're their world.
Right.
So, not to be confused with that. I think we have to step in that, but at the same point in time, recognizing that we could not have planned this. There's no way.
I definitely could have planned being here, that's for sure.
Yes. And it worked out. I know we spoke about this a couple of months ago, but it worked out now, and the divine timing of that, I'm sure, is not lost.
There had to be some medicine in this conversation.
Maybe. Okay. On that note, thank you so much. Thank you for coming out. Thank you for being bold and courageous and putting yourself out there in this way. And I'm sure, and I hope many people will get a lot from it, but most importantly, us too.
Yes. And thank you for making the container.
Thank you. Thanks for showing up this morning.